Well, this discussion today is really, I think, going to be fascinating. I think we're in a particular stage in Australia where the intersection, and I'm not sure that this is the current title, I'm sorry, I did seek the current title and I think it's probably wrong, but it'll do because it's moved. But the political and the universities are in real tension. So we've got an extraordinary topic tonight and two in conversation who are coming from almost opposite directions. Bill Shorten, the Honourable Bill Shorten, is the epitome of an Australian political figure, what we might call Labor Party royalty if we were allowed to. He's been at the very highest level of political life, leader of the Labor Party, opposition leader from 2013 to 19, with ministerial roles across the sector, education, finances, employment, government, and of course NDIS. As a conviction politician, he's been a voice calling for equity, for fairness, for a better society. And now as the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Canberra, which is a place close to my heart, I worked there in the 90s, he's in a place which was all about equity and bringing students who are the first generation of university students to university. So I think that we've got here a politician who is passionate about education. As for royalty, I think Merlin Crossley is academic royalty by any count. His father, John Crossley, was a logician whose book was the Bible of my early years at university. A logician, not a magician. Bill made the point that Merlin might have been seen to be named on the other side of that divide. But Merlin, there you are, a Rhodes Scholar, worked and studied at Melbourne, Monash, Oxford, Harvard, Sydney, and now is DVC at University of New South Wales. So that's a seriously political job for someone who is seriously academic. I just think this, a squid being named in your honour is really quite an extraordinary honour, I think. A bobtail squid. In a time of political turmoil, it's not just political turmoil in the universities in Australia. It's true in the UK, in Europe, in the United States. And I think it's been unprecedented, certainly since the Dawkins reforms. But for the younger generation of academics, and perhaps we're not as well represented that they're here as they might be, incoming students, for graduates looking for work, the political and the educational are deeply intertwined. We can't pretend that the ivory tower of the university is surrounded by impenetrable moats, and how we negotiate this tension is going to be critical to the future of our sector. So thank you both, and please do take to the chairs.
So Bill's just been given a glass of water which is completely full. Mine's half full, or is it half empty? We'll see. So look, I'll just put my phone there, not to make calls, but so I know the time. I'll talk to Bill for about an hour and then we'll have questions. It's terrific to see a full room, which I knew we would, and it's also good to see the TV cameras. I'm very familiar with them, of course, but don't you be shy of them, Bill, because this will be beamed around the world after tonight. So the first thing I want to do is thank you, Bill, for two things. One is you have genuinely dedicated your life to public service and to public fairness, and I think we should recognise that. But you've done something else. When you left, you've decided to throw in your lot with our sector. You decided to make the transition to be a Vice-Chancellor when you could have done anything, and when most or many politicians were criticising Vice-Chancellors, you became one of us. You were a politician made flesh. Now, you were a bit like the Messiah to us, to many of us, and Messiahs don't always fare too well. But I hope you can send our message back to our lords, and I'm just here not to argue with you, although I'll do that a bit, but I'm here to try to guide you, tell you the things I've learned in the sector. It's a dark time for the sector, to be honest, in the West, in England, Australia, and in the US, and I don't want you tripping over anything in the dark, so I'll try to sing out if I think you're going to. So, but to start, there was once a Prime Minister, I don't know if you've ever heard of him, who said about universities, he didn't like any university, it was Scott Morrison, who keeps itself separate from the rest of the community, walks around in gowns and looks down on everybody. And only researches things that are not remotely interesting to anyone. Can I ask you, is that your experience of universities? And if it's not, what is your experience and what is your vision for a utopia of universities?
Okay, that's pretty much everything. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for inviting me, and congratulations to the award winners. Well, like much of what Scott Morrison's said, it won't stand the test of time. The use-by date on that comment was pretty much the moment they left his lips. No, that's not my experience at universities. My father was a Geordie, that's from the northeast of England, and he grew up in the Depression, and he left school at 14 to be a fitter and then work in the dockyards and then go to sea. But my mum was the first in her family. They were Irish Australians. We did have an ancestor at the Eureka Stockade. Somehow we gave away the sword. It's in the museum in Ballarat. I've been trying to work out how to get it. But the point, I digress, she was the first in her family to go to university. So I've been brought up with a respect for technical training and a respect for universities. And my mum ended up working at a university for 35 years. She was in the education faculty, and she upset the law faculty very much when, as a mature age student, she beat all the commercial law students and got the Supreme Court prize. So I've been brought up with the law faculty couldn't believe that someone from the education faculty could do that. So I don't share Morrison's view. I understand the transformative nature of universities. But he's articulating the zeitgeist for some people. So he's wrong, but that is a view out there, that universities are too expensive, that they're self-referential, that if you were to look at a website of a university, you'd see more pictures of buildings than the research they're doing, that you might see that they are viewed by some Australians as being international student sausage factories, more interested in giving tutorials or lectures in Mandarin than are delivering for Aussie kids. COVID wasn't the university, it was very difficult, but it wasn't necessarily the nation or the university's highest moment either. It's always been of interest to me that, well, there's 6 million people who've been to university in Australia, perhaps. How is it that universities become a bit of a whipping boy or a scapegoat when so many Australians have been through university? And why don't they all rally to the flag based upon their great experiences there? So I think Morrison, as he had that knack of doing, was capable, that guy will ultimately only be famous for one thing. Well, maybe AUKUS and beating me, and that's about it. At least he's ambitious in that. But I think that his comments reflected a fault line in the Australian psyche about universities. So there is, what do they say? We have a problem, Houston. Because if some people think it, whether or not it's unfair doesn't necessarily change that they think it. In terms of a utopia, going to the, Merlin, we start big. What I would like to see, and the full caveat that with at least 8 months under my belt, I'll reserve the right to change my views, but what I would like to see is a nation full of critical thinkers, people who want to do lifelong learning, school leavers who feel that when they go to university they're not a number, but the kids they're learning with are their friends, not their competition, that people teaching them like to teach, not lecture. I'd love the idea that we don't privatise the burden of national learning on uni students with this, 40 years later, HEX is proving to be a mixed blessing. It's a very clever mechanism, but it's leaving a lot of debt with kids. I'd like to see universities as a place where adults feel they can dip in and out of learning. That maybe they weren't great students at 17, but at 37 or 57, we're ready to take them. So I think, for me, I have a very personal vision. And if we can ensure that students and that staff feel value and that researchers feel supported, I think that human experience is utopia, because the sum of that will mean a nation capable of seeing through populists, building economic resilience, but a love of lifelong learning. So my vision's a very personal one. Here's a challenge for me, I set myself to you. I would love in 15 years' time or 10 years' time, someone who's a staff member, an early, early stage researcher, a student, an adult, come up to me in 10 years' time and say, do you remember when we were at UC and we did these things? I got this learning. If I could have people in the street stop me, as they do periodically on the NDIS or the Labor Party or my time in the AW, and say, do you remember when we accomplished these things at university? That's when the masses are on board and they're backing you in, that's a good thing.
So that's terrific. I mean, I agree with you about a culture of learning, of lifelong learning, and I think the countries that will succeed in the world are the ones that invest and embrace education, both for social cohesion and for innovation. So I think it's right. I've just been jotting down, so Australia has about 1 million domestic students enrolled today and about 600,000 international students. And you're absolutely right that there are people in society who say, 600,000, that's a lot. The reason we have it is because we don't have a research strategy that covers the costs of research. And I think the premier problem that we have, if I look at my university, it produces this research things like contact lenses. It's got, the drugs, the HIV cocktail of drugs, the trials were done there, and HIV is, really been pushed right back in Australia. Vanadium batteries, the solar cells, 90% of the world's solar panels. We're sort of leading in quantum computing. It's all about sovereign capability, made in Australia. It's all about sovereign security, but no one wants to pay for it. And what has happened is Australia has said no one's paying for this. The microscopes are getting more expensive. So are the teaching platforms, the license fees, but it's mostly the microscopes, and no one wants to pay. So we're taking a lot of international students. Do you see any answer to that?
I'm trying to work out what the question is and what you said. Let's sort of have a bit of provocation here. When I meet with the other VCs, gee, they're smart. A lot of smart people. Wow, just, it's far smarter than any caucus I've been in. Or cabinet, but maybe not. There's a culture of poor us at the universities. We're doing all this great research, why don't people love us? Do you know how many times I've sat as a minister or as an opposition leader and universities will come up and say, we've done these marvellous things in research, and you go, that's marvellous. So the uni say, give us more money. Okay, if you want to keep doing that strategy, keep going. And maybe occasionally you'll get an enlightened politician who said, I love what you're doing. But perhaps the people who have to be convinced, and it's unfair in a democracy that you have to convince people, isn't it? But you do. I think it's unfair that Mr Morrison won 2019, but it happened. So I think that the challenge for universities is, I sit around with these VCs, they say, oh, the NTU is a pain in the butt. Probably. They say the government ministers, they don't get us, probably. But what are you going to do about it?
Well, we did have visionary politicians. I mean, Kim Carr was revered by the sector when he sort of, doubled ARC funding.
Yeah.
He set up future fellowships. He established the Centres of Excellence. He established ARC networks. So many people revere him. And even Tony Abbott with the Medical Research Future Fund. And the point is that, so what these things are, you know the story of Jack and the Beanstalk. What happens is, people say, what are you doing with those magic beans? And most of them aren't magic, but some of them are. And he climbs that beanstalk and he gets the goose that lays the golden egg. And this is how since the Renaissance, this is how wealth is generated, by geese that lay golden eggs. And they're called innovation. Knowledge is power. But the problem is, the guy who gets the goose is never Martin Green, who invented solar panels. It's always Elon Musk, who, went in and did it. The universities, and it's jackpots. Florida University makes a lot of money out of Gatorade. But society, since the Renaissance, the wealth has come from investing in knowledge. And Kim Khan knew that. Tony Abbott knew that. Suddenly, one of the greatest educational centres in the world is dismantling its innovation system. How you understand this world? How do we convince people that plant a few more magic beans because they work?
That's the right question now. How do you convince people? Just statement of moral, authenticity and righteousness is not enough. I mean, it's enough for me. And whilst I was leader, Kim was fine, by the way. Anyway, I stopped being leader, then Kim ran out of air cover. But I think that we need to recognise that I think politics is different to what it was. I mean, I'm very conscious Chris is in the room and he's done so much. But I think politics is different than a really well-executed lobbying mission to Canberra and convincing the Secretary of the Department or the Minister. I think you've got to bring people with you. So, again, I'm very conscious I'm new in the sector, but Kevin Rudd put me into disabilities when I went into Parliament. I'd been the Secretary of the Australian Workers' Union. That was good. He had to do something with me, but he didn't really want to do much for me because when he wanted to take Kim Beazley's job, I said I'd support Kim Beazley. So he had me, but he didn't really want me. He gave me disabilities, which wasn't a big federal area of engagement. And then I thought, well, what have we got here? And within 3 years, we've ended up creating the case for a national disability insurance scheme, which is now $50 billion. Just remember, in 2010, it didn't exist. We're not talking about building on the bequests at Sydney Uni or UNSW, where each successive leadership builds on the inheritance. This was from nothing, where the only way you used to get allocated resources was if you had an adult kid with a disability, if today was worse than yesterday, and if tomorrow was going to be even more of a bin fire than today, you might get something. That is a terrible way to... Nowhere in the history of economics, from Adam Smith to Karl Marx, let's say, in crisisism, and that's how resources were allocated. But we created something from nothing. From nothing. And so I think the challenge in higher ed, bringing my, fresh perspective, is the way you change the political importance of universities. Now, I get that politics is a tawdry business, best done by the tradesmen, but, people have said, universities, they must be very different to politics. The academy, it's very rarefied. Was it Kissinger who said that politics at universities is worse because the stakes are smaller? I don't know.
It was Kissinger.
So I just think we've got to rethink, not what you do. 95% of what I've seen at my university and what I'm aware of other universities is excellent. It's really good. But I think that there's an opportunity to go up a gear in how we educate the people about why this is important. And I think just perhaps some of the standard ways you've been doing it haven't worked. So all I would say, at a certain point, you can keep doing the experiment the same way, but expecting a different result will be the triumph of hope over experience. So, I mean, I've got more thoughts than that, but maybe I'll pause
and
there.
I do congratulate you on creating the NDIS out of nothing. I mean, that is an achievement that, you know, sets Australia apart, and you also had to manage the costs of it, you know, and that's what, and you know, my job as a university manager is about trying to live within our costs, because our costs, particularly for research, I mean, we're trying to keep up with the rest of Asia. Asia seems to be in no doubt about the importance that knowledge is power. It's in no doubt about educating young people. It's in no doubt about adopting technology for sovereign capability and security. I think we've got to get that message across. You know, you've done it once, Bill. I hope you can do it another time. But let's ask something completely different. Who's your favourite academic?
Indiana Jones. That's the sort of academic I want to be. My mum is the real one. She was the first in family, but she had to take a teacher scholarship because the rest of the family was coming after her, and she wanted to do law but couldn't because the money was needed. And when she went to Melbourne Uni in the early 50s, not a lot of women, and not a lot from her background. You know, grandpa was a printer, grandma was a bookbinder. But she believed in learning, and she went on to, you know, do her PhD and, you know, a whole range of other qualifications and things, and she wrote books, and so she is without a doubt my hero, but what she must think from heaven about me being a Vice-Chancellor now. Mind you, I ended up education minutes when she was a teacher, so she's used to ridiculous things happening. But she's, you know, my aunt then, you know, her two younger sisters became nuns, because that was another way out of poverty. It was, again, ended badly in both cases, but one of my aunts then went on to be a PhD and got a qual from the Sorbonne, and then I think she was just let go by James Cook Uni because she was 82 or something, and they must have just sort of sent in the SAS to get her out of her office, but she eventually retired. So I see the power of it all. I understand the value of it.
I think it is true. And, you know, another visionary leader was Gough Whitlam. And, you know, he opened up universities and, you know, transformed our nation. He ran out of money. And again, people wonder why university people always talk about money. It's because, yeah, without money, it's very hard to keep your facilities humming, your students learning, and your staff employed. It's good. I mean, I think Indiana Jones, it is good. He's someone who he's very charismatic, but he's someone who looks at the past. He was interested in the Holy Grail. I sort of like the Holy Grail. But yeah, I mean, I admire people like Howard Florey, penicillin, you know, that's innovation. That creates a lot of, it saves a lot of lives and it creates a lot of wealth. And I like Martin Green at UNSW with solar panels. You know, Howard Florey never managed to patent penicillin and get the revenues. Edward Abrahams after him did for cephalosporins, but they never got them. And we never got them at UNSW for solar cells. It's very hard to capture intellectual property in one-off things. It's not that we didn't try. It's not that Florey didn't try either. But I think those are good answers. Let's talk about, and also, yeah, and your family. I think, you know, everyone recognises that's why it's so unthinkable that in some countries people are reducing these opportunities. Let's talk about one of the things you've said, which is interesting. So there's two things we can do. We can try to generate new revenue, or we can try to reduce duplication and waste. One of the things you've said, Bill, I think I've heard you saying that some universities should specialise, and that actually resonates with me a lot. I think some universities are. My own UNSW is very into tech, engineering, science, medicine, translation through business, very into tech. Some universities are very good at law, arts. Some universities are very good at clinical medicine. There's an overlap, there always will be. Some are extremely good or have been very good at teaching. I remember Notre Dame burst onto the scene at the top of the tables. It's much closer to UNSW on the table now, but it was very close. It was at the top of the table for many years. What's your view? Can we get to teaching-focused institutions, engineering-focused institutions, health-focused institutions? Can we get further along that road? And could you do that to your own university? Because it's good in theory. In practice, it's quite hard.
Well, higher ed, as I'm realising, is not immune to sacred cows. And, I think candidly, 8 months in, so, I accept that it's a precocious analysis. But it is bonkers to have 40 comprehensive universities. Mind you, though, when I say that, that's different layers. I think the GO8s aren't helping the brand of universities in this country. And most of you may work at them, but let me just say to you, it's not you, but, there's a level of arrogance at that level, which means the other unis are always struggling. And the answer I get back from really clever, brilliant VCs are the big ones is, oh, it's a student's choice. Yeah, well, you know what, if my dad had left me $1 billion, I'd probably choose from my business too. And in the meantime, let's also tell some truth. There are courses and areas of Australian life where in a giant continent, you can't just rely on giant metro unis. And if you squash your competition, you're actually left with a wasteland. So I think there's a challenge. The universities are competing themselves to death. Oh, not to death, that's dramatic, but it's evening function, clever people. And I know that Christina invoked us not to use emotion, but no chance of that for me. Why is it possible that if you accept we've got a finite research and educational dollar, it shouldn't be as low as it is. I took a policy in 2016, 2019, commitment to 3% R&D, but until the unicorn arrives with the saddlebags of gold, we need to look at what we can do. And what I feel is that there's a competition between universities to run high volume, high profit, low cost courses. And that way they supplement it, And I don't blame anyone. I get it, that's the insulin, which helps dull the pain of funding cuts. 1989, Dawkins, Hex, good idea to get people who are going to earn a lot of money in their life to reimburse a bit for their education. Great. But it's probably gone too far, hasn't it? Now what we've got is, the average debt in about 2005-06 for a student was about $12,000. Now it's $30,000. It's good that Labor has reduced some of that debt. That is actually, you could argue, is there a more efficient way to have allocated that support? But it's a good start. But it's now $30,000. There's a degree of despair amongst the Zs and millennials. They're locked out of the housing market by our tax laws, the tax preference. Then they're, negative gearing and all that, and wealth is stuck with the boomers and the special generation, and that's fine. But there's young ones are feeling pressured. Then they've got this, so we've got not a great funding system there. I think it needs to be revisited, this debt issue. But beyond that, you've then had the legitimate move by universities. We should be exporting our education. I'm proud of the fact that we are, educating so many international students. I think it's a good thing. I'm a big supporter of it. But that in itself is a strategy which was devised in some ways, not just because of our love of education, but because of our need for resources. And then we've got this requirement in legislation. Every university's got to do a set amount of research, which is fine if the funding's backing it up. But what it's doing, I think there should be research at every university. So it's not a binary, just teaching, just research. You can put those two polar positions just to help the debate. But, I think it should be somewhere less, in the middle of that. But why do we need to have 3 different unis offering teaching and nursing in a particular geographic jurisdiction? Why, 70% of our undergraduate courses are business law or IT? There's not an accident why that is. It's because they're in some ways easier to deliver, or at least more cost effective. So I think that the unis need to work together better. You know, it's the GO8s are doing some amazing research, which should be just, you know, frankly, given a public, we should have a public holiday and honour it. It's that good. But, I mean, we have a public holiday for football. But I do think that, you know, at UC, I'm going to work out what we're really good at and not try and be in everything. But that's just a view.
So I'll come back to competition because it's the first thing that I really haven't agreed with. And we'll talk about that. I actually, what you said about, you know, why should every unit, you said a few things that I agree with. First of all, at the moment, universities have to do research in 50% of the disciplines in which they teach. And it didn't used to be like that. It used to be that universities had to do world-class research in three areas. And that was what you said. There should be some research, but you didn't have to do 50%. There was the Coldrake Review, and they lifted the standard. So I think that has had, the idea was that you could drop down to be a university college and that regulation wouldn't apply. No one volunteered to drop down. So it was a policy that, again, I think was good in theory. It hasn't worked in practice. Your thing about every university, I don't believe universities compete at all. I think we're just all hungry for resources to keep our students and staff and research coming, but I'll come back to that. The idea of...
No, this just before we wander off that sort of throwaway line, universities don't compete, is what you just said, but then you said, but we're all hungry for resources, students. Like, that's what's driving the competition.
So
but those statements don't quite
So there's a minister who keeps saying it's in the Hunger Games. In the Hunger Games, the idea is to kill the other players. I have no interest at all in killing any other university.
Let's not argue by the metaphor back to the point.
Yeah.
I think what they mean by the Hunger Games is there's a degree of unhealthy competition.
There's a desire for growth. I mean, so let's say, you know, my university has an RNA institute, thanks partly to the New South Wales government and chief scientist. And we've got all the universities there, but we've got a lot of infrastructure in our university. If there's another pandemic, like Ebola, people might be very happy that we have such an infrastructure. A new building with new costs, technical staff to maintain this is hugely expensive. The only way to keep sophisticated infrastructure going is to expand the numbers of students. So do we put low-cost courses which will attract high-fee paying students in so that we can support this sovereign capability because no one else is supporting it, although I'm grateful? You bet we do. Yeah, we do that to put another university out of business? You bet we don't.
Merlin, I've been in politics. I get the argument the ends justifies the means, which is what you've just run. The fact, though, is that when you drop your ATARs by 5, Sydney Uni starts harvesting WSU's base. When UNSW gets a government subsidy, by the way, of $100 million, it wasn't genius, it's just the taxpayers to create a university facility in Canberra, a city of 500,000 where we've got 6 universities, and you want to take your, sure, that RNA building and laboratory is crucial, but understand that in the pursuit of what you see as the particular goal, it's like a big dinosaur's tail swishing around and knocking everything else out the way. If UC was to go under, which we won't, but these smaller unis, there is losses then. And it's not so much that there's deliberate intent. I don't think that for one second. Collaboration is a watchword, and there's so many universities collaborating at so many levels. It's why I've been mystified, frankly, that when collaboration is the culture, that somewhere along the line, because of a competition for that rare funding dollar, that we're seeing, I think, decisions being made, to suit Kensington, which then have a consequence in Wagga.
So there was a university, not far from you now, that made the decision not to grow student numbers. It decided to be small and beautiful. Now it's even smaller, and it's actually less beautiful. Unless every university leader, including you, primary responsibility will be to grow student numbers, to sustain the increasingly, and this will continue until the government is aware of research strategy, which
I get you.
Asia has of Singapore. You like Singapore. I like Singapore. I think you like some aspects of Singapore. I like some aspects of Singapore.
They'd probably chuck me in jail, but the reality is they're great. If you're an opposition leader, not so cool in Singapore.
But they're good at...
Great country.
Yeah. But they're very good at investing in innovation.
Yeah, I think you're making my case, which is good of you. What I'm saying is that we need to look at market stewardship. That's how we work together. Now, there's this, what I see in this sector is it's a bizarre blend of sort of command control economics and complete laissez-faire, like last seen at Port Royal and the Tortugas and the Caribbean pirates, where anything goes. What's interesting is that at one level, universities have got so many different regulators. It is out of control. Just on behalf of a political class, I'm really sorry. But, there's regulations. You've got regulators for regulators. And that's sort of absurd and adds cost. Seeking gold-plated compliance to solve a historic problem. It's not really... So I get that there's a lot of problems there. But then also, there's no sort of market stewardship about, do we really need to have 2 universities offering teacher colleges in Orange? Really? Which is what's happening. So I think that, but it's all sort of justified, well, because we're all in the same sort of ghetto and not getting enough money, and the microscopes are costing more, and all of that very legitimate analysis. So somewhere along the line, the university sector's got to learn to work together. The way they pursue academic research, they just need to take that same beautiful logic and apply it in a political context. There's no higher ed faction. In Parliament, the community. How is it that is it about 6 million people who got degrees in Australia?
Yeah, I don't know the exact
I think
number.
But the point
what's
is,
our population? It'll be more than that, I think.
But the point is, there's millions of people who've been to universities, yet no one votes on universities. The Morrison government tried the jobs-ready graduate experiment, and if you've got a campus in a marginal seat, I'm jealous, because they do periodically just get the cargo cult. Here's Boothby, hats off to Flinders Uni. They just happen to be in a marginal seat, which was never traditionally marginal. All of a sudden, the parties are shoving the gold out of the helicopters. Take this, take this. But that's not really a higher ed policy sufficiently, is it?
So I think so. I'm sorry, I was just triggered when you said the GO8s were arrogant, because we're very humble. But the thing is, but I do take your point about,
No offence, I've been called arrogant my whole life, so
it's a compliment.
not a total insult,
So the teaching college is one. I do think that is very interesting, because it's absolutely true that, well, you will see a lot of, so almost every university in the campus has a little business school in Australia, has a little business school in the CBD at Sydney. So you're absolutely right. And Sydney, that can probably handle it. But you're right about, do we need 2 teaching courses and so and so. But let me put it this way. Would you close yours?
I guess it's all a package, isn't it? I wouldn't. I love my education faculty, and the reality is we educate nearly every teacher in Canberra. But are there things that we're doing which someone else could do, and are there things that they're doing which we could do? You could at least have the discussion. Maybe it gets too hard, but you could at least have the discussion. And by the way, universities are already having the discussion internally. They're shutting their courses. So it's sort of happening, but it's, again, not being done. Is it anti-competitive for universities to get together and say, we'll have, this is your patch, this is our patch, we'll work together? I think that's, in the case of higher ed, it's a good idea.
And on that note, I think we should recognise what University of South Australia and Adelaide University are doing.
Yeah.
They had a couple of runs at that. it was quite hard. It was obvious that one Vice-Chancellor, one Chancellor were going to lose their jobs, you know. It's not an easy thing to do. It's also technically very difficult for them in terms of their payroll system and back office things. But I think it's the right thing. I think it's going to be a very big university. I think there were a few bumps on the road as they removed duplication over the years. But you have to take your hat off to them for doing that.
Well, and Peter Malinauskas, who I admire greatly, I take my hat off for him putting in $500 million. You can always solve problems with money. But I'm not talking mergers, so to be clear. Because I think identity matters. You've got to be close to the grassroots. Now, it's okay if you're Sydney or UNSW because, you know, you've just got brilliant brands. But I think the strength of a lot of universities for First in Family and for equity is to be in their communities. So I'm not saying mergers. What I am saying is, do we all need to be competing for the same low-hanging fruit? And how could we then allow us to focus on being really good at teaching, really good at engineering, really good at, rather than a sort of diffusing our effort? Anyway, I'm very conscious, this has all been said before. There's precisely nothing I'm saying except other than perhaps how the higher ed sector should organise its message, which people haven't tried before, but the times have now changed. I had the chance to go to Kiev 3 weekends ago, to a think tank, which was amazing. And we're very lucky, you know, I'm a history guy. I get we've got a moat, a big moat. But we are slow here, and maybe that's a problem of Western liberal democracies. We do check with the people, so things slow down. But what I saw in UK just made me realise that the world is not the world we thought it's been for the last 30 years. And that in fact there are global actors who really don't respect our system, who don't respect diversity or multiculturalism or whatever. And I think universities actually, this is our time. That rather than being defensive, we should realise what we offer the country. When I look at the research that's going on in the teaching, I'm blown away by some of the research that our researchers are doing. And I'm quite amazed. Every one of them's got a front page story. They actually, it can be applied or general research, but you see how it gets to the people. But this is our time. The nation actually needs us, and we need to meet the nation and demonstrate through our sort of servant ethos, our service ethos. But we just also need to get our own act together a bit.
So if I go now to change the topic about, so the title, Have Universities Come Too Political, was set up a long time ago. It was at a time when I was thinking about the election, and if Labor hadn't won, there was, you know, it was the idea that the one side of politics didn't like universities. We thought at the time the other side of politics might, but actually we're not certain. But there was this flip-flop that one side of politics, and it was a flip-flop that had emerged. I mean, going back, to be fair, you know, Menzies was a strong supporter of universities. Howard, with Backing Australia's Ability 1 and 2, and Enquist was a strong supporter of universities. Brendan Nelson was a strong supporter of universities. It wasn't bipartisan. Universities were supported, cherished for their sovereign capability and contributions to sovereign security by both sides of Parliament. But I was sensing that we were going to end up like another institution that I absolutely adore, the ABC, where it tends to be hammered by one side of politics and kept alive by the other side. I didn't want this flip. I think in Australia now, I think we've got a stable government until the opposition reforms. But do you think, Bill, looking at what's happened in America, England's different, but you know, do universities have to be careful with advocacy, or can they be as political as they like?
Be careful with partisanship, but advocacy is core business. Partisanship is not what you want. Like, one of the reasons I enjoy being at the university, I mean, it's a bit hard. People know me more for my political than making UC great again yet, but I'm enjoying not being as partisan. Now, some of you might feel you haven't detected that yet, but trust me, the stupidity to question time is a relief not to be there. I mean, by the way, don't get me wrong, I loved it. Christina, it can be fun, but I get that sometimes, when I say the stupidity, it's an important process, but rather just the sort of rote use of cudgel lines against each other is really dumb. And we don't need to be partisan in education. But advocacy is a different issue. I mean, the research that people do in itself is powerful. If there's research done at a university which says that waiting times for access to dementia assessments is blowing out, one party might not like that or another party, but it's just the facts. It's the evidence. So where the evidence goes is where the evidence goes. Where the data goes, it's where it goes. So we shouldn't be shy of that. But partisanship should be avoided. But what I think has happened electorally is that once upon a time, a tertiary education was a predictor of voting Liberal. Now it's practically the most significant predictor of voting Labor. Fun fact, which only I would know, but now you will know, is in 2019 when Morrison won his so-called miracle, and I'm over it, sort of. I was brought up that miracles did good things. But the 20% of the seats swung more than 4% to me. The 30 seats out of the 150 swung more than 4% to Labor in 2019. Of course, when you lose, no one talks about any of the good points. But you know what was the common feature of those 30 seats? They're the most tertiary educated seats in the country. So I think, unfortunately, there's been a bit of a backlash in elements of the right, somehow blaming universities for the fact that their own policies didn't appeal to people with an education and capacity for critical thinking. And we need to claw that back. So I loathe partisanship. You know, when I'm looking at getting adjuncts for what we're doing in business, government and law, I'm putting as many Libs in as Labor, because what the nation actually needs, and this is again where universities can step up, is we need safe places for moderate thinkers of all points of view to come together and contest the idea without the destruction, without running a tax campaign on the end of it. And we don't, and that's, I think, a place where our universities, and certainly I hope you see, I want us to be a safe place where we can actually argue beyond the electoral cycle or the nightly news cycle or the 12-hour cycle or the Twitter cycle, because there's so many issues that get put off into the too hard basket by politics, or at least move inch by inch rather than actually at speed and at pace. Did that answer your question?
I think that's good. I think the advice about being non-partisan and being seen to be non-partisan is very good advice. So going into the too hard basket.
That means that I'm going to specifically try and find people from the right to work at my uni, and to be part of it. You've got to go and it's no good just getting into the silos. And university, there is a critique which can be made that most academics tend to vote left of centre or whatever. And that's fine because it's a free country and every person's side of the view. But I think unis have to, but you don't have to kowtow to a stupid policy. Like, I'm not woke, but we introduced a new grad cert in our LGBTI policy. And of course, skies leapt on it and they said I'm the king of woke. I thought, actually, in our law school, we teach 80 different subjects. And by the way, this is what the market research said was new demand. And the other thing is, it's not compulsory. Like, you don't have to study it. So you've still got to stand your ground, but I think there's a way to do it which brings people with us.
Yeah, so I think that is good advice. So into the too high basket, I looked at, it's happened here, but it's happened in the UK, and I looked at, I was reading the Times Higher Ed and all the comments after the articles, and they weren't about universities, they weren't about quality of teaching, they weren't about research, they weren't about, what they were all about was Vice-Chancellor's salaries. And I was a bit surprised. I mean, Deputy Vice-Chancellors get paid very little, but Vice-Chancellors, it is clearly drawn their ire. And it's quite interesting. And the argument was that Vice-Chancellor salaries are much higher than other parts of the education sector. So Vice-Chancellors are being compared to primary schools, secondary schools, TAFEs. The reason that the salaries are high often is because there's been a view that universities weren't business-like enough, and a lot of the university councils have a lot of business people on them, and the business people look at the salaries and they say, oh my goodness, is that all you're offering the Vice-Chancellor? But part of me feels it's good if there's a world where people who want to be paid well don't think I need to be a lawyer, a banker,
Consultant after politics.
a consultant after politics. And you could have done that. You could have done that. But, a consultant after politics, what I'm going to do is education. So that's my sort of feeling. But on the other hand, I see it. It's not ending. What do you think? Can you justify Vice-Chancellor salaries or not? I don't know.
Sure. I'm with it. Yeah, there's a series of issues the university sector's been dealing with like whack-a-mole. There's the appropriate issue, making sure that there's no gender violence on campus. There's the issue of we really looking after our international students. There is how can we muck up the weekend penalty rates. The legitimate criticisms and Vice-Chancellor's wages, some of them certainly feel high. I made a decision when I was offered the job to reduce mine, not because I didn't think I was worth it, I just thought there's something magical about $1 million and I really just didn't want the poo storm. And I was probably right. Mind you, I think unis could have made the case better, but I think sometimes there's a degree of panic when you get a bad news issue. And, I think the VCs need to be, if you're going to get paid really good money, and it's really good money, they shouldn't send spokespeople out on bad issues. Like, trust me, I've got bad news and good news to give, but you give it yourself. I do think that you need to not necessarily rely on external consultants as much. I do think you need to do your staff meetings. Now, I'm sure you could find someone who's unhappy at UC right now and say, well, it's not happening, but it is. I'm doing all of that. I think that the role of a VC, if you're going to be paid good coin, then you can't just be business as usual. You've got to be a bit of a personality, you've got to be out there. I think people can work out if you're showing in the best interests. You'll never win an argument overall. Like, I was a politician. The people were never going to be happy. When John Howard gave in to Latham on getting rid of defined benefit pensions, I got there after that. So I got no pension. Because I wasn't disgraced, because I picked my own time of resigning, I didn't cause a by-election, I got nothing. So you can't win arguments. We're politicians, no one's going to be happy until we were hitchhiking to Canberra and camping on the lawn. So you can't win those sort of politics debates about wages at one level, but another level, you can step up. So I think that you can make the case, and I think that you've just got to be a really good all-round leader to justify the good money. Mind you, corporate execs get a lot of money, no one seems to hammer them. Also, there's a bit of media cheekiness in the reporting. They say, oh, Minister gets this, you get that. Well, actually, Minister gets a lot more than the number you quoted, because they never quote their super, they never quote their cars, they never quote the other benefits. But I also know that once you are in that argument, you've lost. So I think what you've got to do is just do your day job really well and be really, if you become a VC to bludge, well, then you probably should look at yourself. But most of the VCs I've met so far, and I don't know them that well, but from what I see, is they're all pretty hardworking. So the way you get out of it is, rather than do your job well, recognise you're not going to win every argument, but don't go into hiding. But the other thing I think is redefine the narrative. At the moment, the university sector's experienced the death of 1,000 cuts. Individual issues rolled out. And you're always on the back foot. That's why I'm interested in how do the universities learn to work together at that important sort of level, and then how do we reframe the narrative about Australia's got a lot of challenges, and actually universities are the people who are going to help deliver the productivity, the security, the critical thinking, which I think Australians deep down would like to see more of.
So, so thanks for taking that question so seriously. I think that's helpful. I'm going to ask one more question, and then I think we can go to the audience for questions. So it's 9 minutes past 7. We're meant to wrap up at 7:30, so we'll have about 20 minutes of questions for the audience, and I think it'll be just hands. Oh, we've got a roving mic. But I want to ask you about, so I just want to say, I think one of the challenges Australia has had is balancing vocational education and universities, and I think that the fee-free TAFE has been one of the best government policies that is sort of not as widely known as it should be. It should really be celebrated. I think it's a huge thing. But one of the things the government hasn't done, which has surprised people, is it hasn't reversed job-ready graduates. And job-ready graduates was a Morrison government thing which basically said, we're going to put up the fees for subjects that they didn't value as much, and there's been a war in the humanities for years to the detriment of our whole society, and it's tragic because the humanities actually don't cost very much. It'd be easy to preserve them, but there's a war, and students from underprivileged background often do the humanities because they didn't happen to have the privilege of a good maths and physics teacher, and they didn't get into medicine. So they start with the humanities. They often go on to law, but now they don't start because the fees are a deterrent. And that's affecting a lot of our universities that served a demographic which wanted to start with humanities and then go anywhere. And now they're not going. What do you think the answer to that is, if anything?
Well, first of all, Australians voted for Morrison, so that's the first thing. You've got to change your government.
I thought you won,
and that happened.
Won that election.
Yeah. I've got to think about that for a while. And so the government only got elected in 2022. I don't think there's a lot of love for job-ready graduate program in the government. But they've prioritised reducing the debt first. They've worked on the Accord and mission-based compacts and looking at moving to managed growth. They've had to sort of work out what to do about international students in the hothouse of an anti-immigration backlash. So I think they have been focused. The first legislation they put up in the new term was a university students' legislation to reduce their debt. So that's good. But I hope that they do something on the JRG in this term. I mean, always remember though, when you're sitting at the cabinet table, you're at ERC, you know, Defence need their new tech, and that's true, and social services want to make sure that single mums are getting a better deal, you know, and then you've got housing, you've got to build stuff, and there's infrastructure, and then there's a lot to take up the bandwidth for the government. So our challenge is, I'm sure they get JRG's problems. That's, you know, you don't have to convince them it's not a great idea. I think though, it's how do you get it on the agenda? One thing is some of the unis have said, they're not doing enough. When you're a poly, you're used to people throwing bricks at you, but when you do something good, you'd wonder if they could just drop one brick for the day and give you the day off before they pick up the brick the next day and throw it at you. And you know, I think the government is quite focused on higher ed, albeit the 40-year decline with student debt, poor research funding. So I'm not here to defend them at all. But my hunch would be that they'll move on doing something in this term. But they're also trying to work out how to do vet and higher ed and get it to speak as one system. It's like a rail gauge issue. You know, there's just two systems and they don't speak to each other. I understand. I've read Merlin's article on, you know, skills and trade schools as opposed to learning in university. But I think tertiary harmonisation is a sensible proposition to at least get the common taxonomy so we can map where we're going as a nation. So I think it'll be moved on in this term. It should be. It must be. But I think part of the challenge for universities, with the caveat, I've only been doing it for 8 months, is how do we get our act together? Just complaining about the world and the unfairness of it get you some of the way. It's therapeutic. But beyond that, we need to work out what do we need so that we can use the resources we got to really create the value and for the people to see it, not just the government.
Yeah, and I should commend the Royal Society of New South Wales. You know, when I was first involved, it was mostly science, and people, Don Hector and Christy, others. We've got now a lot of people from philosophy, law. In the awards this year, we got creative and performing arts, and we're bringing people more and more, and Susan Pond as well. All the people have deliberately expanded the Royal Society of New South Wales so that it is, as Christy said, you know, has all these disciplines. So let's go to questions. Now, some of you, I won't know everyone's names and things, so, but whoever's got a microphone is speaking. Lindsay, you've got it. No, Don.
Thanks very much for a very interesting discussion. In some respects, I think, though, we've maybe been talking about the wrong question, because I think you're absolutely right from where I sit. And by the way, I'm not an academic. I worked in business all my life. From where I sit, the simple problem is that no one really talks about very much is that Australia does not raise enough tax revenue. So we've constantly got these competing imperatives of keeping the population healthy, of educating it, of defending it, and we're paying probably 3 or 4% too little in terms of tax. Now, I'm not suggesting we should raise income taxes. We definitely should start taxing resources. If you go to Norway, they established a sovereign wealth fund for the same reason that we established ours, to pay pensions, and it became so rich that now you don't have to pay anything to get educated in Norway. And we simply are ignoring the fact that there has to be a greater tax revenue in Australia, or we won't solve any of these problems, and they're so intertwined, and so much favouritism has been shown to the top end of town, so that now you're seeing, you know, great wealth inequality, great income inequality, and that means that you're getting all these people at the bottom end who are getting so seriously ticked off that they start voting for sovereign citizenship and for all of these other harebrained ratbag ideas because they've been so comprehensively shafted.
Good question.
Well, that sounds more like it sounds like a branch meeting, and that's good. I take that more as a comment, but I make this point. It's not just resources. Our tax system taxes income too heavily and property too lightly. Yeah. You know, the fact is that you could go to work every day as an academic or a plumber or a nurse, and once you get to the highest marginal rate, you're paying that plus GST, you're paying a lot of tax. Whereas you could just buy a building and then sell it later on, and you just pay the capital gains discount tax, which is a lower rate. So, and that doesn't reward active so I think our tax system is out of balance. But beyond that, there's another assumption in your question or your observation which I need to draw up. Why does Australian business don't think they shouldn't just contribute to higher ed?
They should. Absolutely they should.
But then what we've got to do is have a conversation, and I've asked my academics to mixed reaction. I said, what is it that we're doing here that business would pay for? Now some say, oh, Vice-Chancellor, you don't understand, it's academic freedom and general research. I said, yeah, that's all good, but what do we do which we could actually get someone to pay for which doesn't use a government subsidy?
Answer that question in my time. Sorry, let me just answer that. If I could answer that question, in my time in business, the companies that I worked for did pay for research. Okay. We took research contracts to the University of Sydney and to the University of New South Wales, and we paid absolutely for those, and we paid top dollar for them, and we're pleased to do so.
Can I catch you afterwards? Okay, good.
I'm thinking, Bill, in your campaign, you should have tried franking credits. That would have been a good idea.
Now, what is wrong? I don't know why I thought that getting an income tax refund on tax you hadn't paid was a... Anyway, never mind.
Richard.
Never mind.
Could I bring the topic back to people? How can we make universities a good experience for students, and how can we make universities a good experience for staff? And if I can embroider that a little bit, the current student... sure, HECS is a problem, but surviving during their student is the huge problem. How can we expect a good university student experience when the average student's working 30 hours in paid employment to try to pay their way through getting the rent, the food that they need?
Gigantic.
I mean, there's one Sydney university that I'm aware of that spends more than $25 million a year providing food for students. So it's all very well to talk about things from the institution's perspective, but can we talk about things from the perspective of both staff and students?
Well, I think I've started this whole conversation about what my view of utopia is, that students feel they have a good experience, that they're not treated as a number, that staff can sort of feel supported. So I'd come from the people perspective, and I think I'd actually caveated when I talked about higher ed utopia, I said it was my perspective, the lens was people. So I agree with you. One of the things which UC is doing really well is we have a medical and counselling centre which is not outsourced. So we have doctors, we have nurses, we have psychologists, we have a psychiatrist. It is a ripper. I am blown away by what they do. But what I'm also surprised is not every unis, I know there's some unis who send their students to us to do that because they're not providing that at their own shops. So I think the mental well-being of students is we know the importance of it. The pitch I make to parents now in Canberra and the regions is that we'll get your kid, if they come to our uni, very good chance of them getting a job at the end. I hate to be so in the people, in the vernacular, but what I said, but I'll make sure that our uni doesn't stuff them up on the way through. Parents are worried that if their kid goes to uni, it might damage them more than help them. Now, correct for all the professors here who'd say, well, that's not right, and we do great things. I'm telling you, I've done more quantitative research in the last 6 months about the attitude of parents because I want to know why people pick a university. I'm intensely interested in that question, and it's their mental well-being and support. Then we get to the adults, the people coming back who've got to juggle family, bills, time, like it or not, I want everyone to come to campus, but we're going to do more online because I need to deliver flexibly so those kids who are doing their 30 hours work a week can get their lectures when it suits them. For our staff, we've got to do more there, and my main aim there has got to be given better technology to teach with, and the other thing I've got to do is I've got to get the work processes better. It is soul-destroying for some of our staff, the sort of crazy compliance we ask them to do when they just want to teach or research. So I'm, and if you've got good ideas, drop them to me. I'm interested.
Yeah, and I think that this shift that I've seen, we have, as you know very well, very good student society, which we support as much because they're very good at delivering. But the other thing we've done is have a big shift towards celebrating the teachers, and we've got 20% of our staff, education-focused staff. There are people who are absolutely dedicated to their teaching now, and you and I both know some of these people who are role models for this community. It's not enough. If students are working 30 hours, it's a big challenge. And the balance, we put things online too, but then the sense of community drops away. So there's all these trade-offs. But I agree, but elevating teaching is one of the things that can help. So, and I agree, I think everyone wants students to have a better experience.
I went through my first promotions panel sort of process. It was very interesting. I learned a lot about a lot. But one thing I realised is that for some of getting a raise, is not straightforward. And it's a very sort of codified system of levels and C's and D's and E's. I'm learning about it. It's incredibly interesting. But what I realised is that some of the people applying were being encouraged to look at judged on their research and education portfolio, where frankly some of them are very good educators. So we're going to look at how do I make sure they get the message that you can get that stream of promotion, just being really good educators. But we're making mistakes, and we had a staff survey. I'm going to flex to everyone here. Like UC did have a really bad year last year. Like it was, like as bad goes, it was badish bad. Not as bad as the current federal opposition, but heading there. It's sort of a low-level Rudd Gillard era time. But when they've done the staff surveys, we've actually improved. Like they said, you're the best improved of any uni. Mind you, it was low basic at quite a point. So it's important getting the staff stuff right, because if your staff come to work happy and feeling valued, every other stat's going to go up.
I come from a university which is currently undertaking an exercise in seppuku, University of Technology, Sydney.
Yeah, no, we still had to guess. It wasn't clear just the seppuku on its own.
When you were talking, I was thinking about how do you sell universities to the population as a good thing, when we can clearly see how you sell universities to the population as a bad thing. Right? UTS is modelling that. But the thing I find interesting is that when you were talking about managing or presenting universities, university governance, the councils, I think are critical in this. Right? Like, it seems to me that the council need to reflect that diversity of the society that has a stake in the universities. But most university councils represent a small elite. You mentioned that they're mainly people from business, etc., etc. Right? They're also mainly from the Anglo-sphere in Australian society. Do you think it's one of the challenges facing universities in selling themselves to a multicultural society is actually looking like the society that they're part of?
When I was Leader of Labor, I supported the 50-50 rule for affirmative action. I do think you should try and look like the people, your communities. I don't support a majority staff control council though, because I think that's just one group of stakeholders. But I do think it's important to have staff and empowered staff reps on the council, empowered student reps on the council. Don't just get them elected and then leave them to their own devices, because that's, you're ticking the box, but you're not fair income. State governments appoint a lot of the councils. Listen, my council, the gender balance is pretty good. We've got a not bad ethnic sort of diversity, but it is important. I think different universities have got different traditions who gets on their senates or their councils. But one thing I do think is that councils shouldn't be disrespected. Like, I hear what you say about a business mentality solely, and that's a fair critique. But sometimes you could detect in management and the senior ranks of university leadership, they view council as a pain in the butt. I do not have that view. Like, maybe sometimes issues get raised which you think, oh, just read the papers. But actually, a council is a good break on an unaccountable or a more out of touch management. So I guess because I come from public life, I'm used that there's always someone scrutinising you. And so I think that university leaderships have got to accept that. Don't complain about that, lean into it, get the best out of it. I know that's a slightly different point to the one you're making. I agree about looking like it, but I think that, and the same with academic boards. I think there's a view perhaps in some university leaderships that academic boards are a pain in the butt. That could be...
It's green sleeves, it's the ice cream van.
No, it's very GO8. Anyway.
So can I just say, I don't want to leave people with the impression, I said there were business people, but we have, I think ours is about 14, 15. We have 2 academic staff reps, a professional staff rep, undergraduate student, postgraduate, so it's 5, and then president of the academic board, 6, the Vice-Chancellor. So we've got 7, so it's, and then there are some people from the business community, I can't remember. And then we have one Indigenous person who's very good from the education sector. So it's not, I don't think people should think it's just because business have taken over universities and made them into corporations. That people think that, but I don't think it is that. But anyway, Susan.
Susan Pond, Bill, I wanted to go to the point that both you and Merlin have touched on about the over-regulation of universities. I've been on a council of a university in Queensland for the last 6 years. It's just putting in its accreditation again for TEXA. It is over-regulated. You mentioned the fact that the states do nominate some members to council, not all, but some. So where are the fixable issues in the regulation of universities that could be quick wins?
Well, it's something I've noticed. I have to say I wasn't so aware of it till I moved into the sector, but there's sort of myriad of And the myriad of regulation, federal and state, is quite complicated. We've just done our TEXA and CRICOS stuff. I think that Mary Russell at TEXA and Kerry Lee, their chair, are on the right path in terms of TEXA. They're looking to make it more principles-based than tick box compliance. So I think that is going to evolve. That seems, to me, in my opinion, to be evolving positively. The uni sector should really, again, this is one the uni sector needs to do the homework. Let's make why is it that politics is treated as less of an academic pursuit than the research they're doing? Like, why is it we don't present the case, look at the 16 or 17 regulators who are interfering and start to make the case rather than just sort of have a big whinge? So I think that's part of it. Now, again, I'm conscious that there might be people who say, oh, we've done all this before, Bill. Okay, well, you have to do it again because it hasn't worked.
No, we'd welcome your help with that. So look, it's 7:29. We can have a couple more questions, but just a couple more.
Hopefully this is a quick one. But we are a heavy employer of graduates from universities, particularly in the areas of mechanical engineering and industrial design. Can you comment on why my experience in trying to find the ideal candidate to fill our roles, particularly in mechanical engineering, is particularly challenging because there's a lack of direct application of the skills they've learned whilst at university that we can employ as part of Australian industry?
We don't have a mech engineering proposition at UC, but we do have industrial design. And I speak to a lot of employers. I don't think it's wrong to ask employers what they want. That may sound obvious, but I think it's sensible. So I've been meeting with a lot of employers across all the vocations that we teach in. And I've said, what is it about our graduates you think they're not having when they come to see you? Because it is interesting. You look at the ASX 200, most of them have their own training academies. Now, if we're doing everything right, why do they all need to have their own training academies? So there is a disconnect. Having said that, I think work-integrated learning is crucial. I think the more that, and I love it at our uni, we're doing a lot of that, the more that I can get my students into workplaces whilst they're studying, that I just think has qualitative impact upon their study, because they have those light bulb moments. If someone working in an aged care nursing facility, someone doing clinical psychology, someone working at an urban planners, someone working for the government architects, they pick it up then. They go, right, now it sort of does help you anchor it. So work-integrated learning, I think, is a very useful thing. I think also the inclusion of AI in all of our subjects, how to use it. We need to make sure that our learnings are keeping pace with what industry need. So I think consultation with industry is crucial. It's interesting. Whilst I think everyone's doing that, I've been amazed at the level of naivety on both sides. Like, I know what it is to go and sit down and consult with someone, and I think we just need to become better at that because, and so in your case of your business, I'll get you any industrial design you need. All right, just come to us in the future. Because that's not competition, that's just me, I want the best laboratory, so therefore you come to us.
That's a promise made. So last question, Pamela.
I think that it's a sick society that neglects the humanities and the arts, and it distresses me greatly that the fees are so high for the arts. And I did take on board what you said about years ago, in the period that I received my arts education. We actually put many more hours in, we did practical work, but at the same time we were on scholarships and things like that. Not frequently we came from backgrounds where we would not have got a degree had we not done an arts degree. And from then you can keep life learning and develop other things. So what are we going to do long term? Because this country will pay a price, certainly with regard to creativity, if we keep neglecting the arts in the way we are.
I mean, my background's humanities. I love it. It's funny. I wanted to hire an academic at the university, and someone said to me, "Oh, you don't understand, Vice-Chancellor. Their speciality is history. We don't do history." I said, "What?" They said, "History is in everything we do." And I said, "Your Vice-Chancellor's got a history background, so we're going to do it." So I think that there is a giant case of advocacy about the arts. Jobs ready, I think the government already knows that's a stinker, and so that should be worked on. But I also am interested, how do we get adults back to do elements of arts courses? I said that in a talk I gave recently, I thought the prime position of a 3-year degree needs to be revisited, and we need to allow people access just to do subjects. One way I could revitalise arts programs is let people just do 1 unit. Why do I have to say that you've got to sign in blood for 3 years? Now, I want my 3-year degrees. I want those students. I want the 4-year degrees with their 4 years. I want my masters. I want my PhDs. I'm hungry for everyone, if you hadn't detected. But why not let people do one subject? See, what I love about the equity debate is, once upon a time, you know, my grandparents couldn't have gone to Melbourne Uni because they weren't welcome. Women weren't welcome in many courses. Indigenous people weren't welcome. Disabled people were regarded as mentally feeble. We've dealt with, you know, to better or worse, we're really getting into that. But then there's different ways to exclude people. You mightn't be able to take 3 years off to do a full-time Bachelor of Arts, but why not let them do a subject? And then you can stack it. The South Koreans have answered that question. So I want knowledge to be democratic. I want people to be able to access, you know, the best way, and also I want them to come back. The best way for me to teach someone their second unit of study is to teach them their first unit. So I'm a complete equal opportunist. I want you. So that's how I would do it.
Okay, so we'll wrap up, and I do want to thank you. I think it was superb. I think, you know, a lot of the things you said made a lot of sense. I also don't agree mergers save very much money, except for that South Australian one, which I think is good. I agree with so much the TEXA thing, if we can get the regulations back. And I just do want to thank you for coming here. I want you to thank you for throwing in your lot with universities. I think Australia has a chance of not going the same way as some other countries. We're in the Asian time zone. We're in a region where people do believe in that knowledge is power and knowledge is fun. I also want to thank you for not mentioning AI, because it's been a relief to talk about things where the conversation, AI is important, but it can hijack the conversation. So I think it's been terrific. I've enjoyed it very much, and I'm sure everyone has. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Merlin.
It was great. Thank you.
Yeah. Look, really interesting. I do feel that we're in a point where we need to change, and possibly not the big boys, Merlin, possibly not the big boys, but we do need to have a change across the system, and so many of the factors that you've talked about are important to it, and I think we've come. We didn't talk really about political interference in the United States in the universities, but that's something which I think is worrying. And we haven't talked very much about how global education ought to be in this new age of political division and the rise of the nation state. So, you know, you talk about sovereign identities and the importance, but we do have in the university another faith, which is the cosmopolitan faith, the faith in the global. And so we need to get that community balanced. I think there's some very important points that you've made. I think, why is it that our graduates don't care so much about our universities? So that's a problem. It is a problem. And we need to be thinking about it and what we did wrong. And I think we are still doing things wrong. And I'm going to give you, Bill, which is a terribly heavy book by one of our fellows, Roy McLeod, about one of our first, sorry, I better stay here, one of the most important people in setting up the Royal Society, Archibald Liversidge. It's not just a street in Canberra, Liversidge, but a very, you have the awards, and it's a really interesting story, although I have to admit I haven't read it all. It's a pretty dense volume, but page 480, and it's but Liversidge himself was part of a really important process, not just for the Royal Society, but for Australia, the Imperial University. And I think when he's talking about him, McLeod points out that he was a confirmed bachelor, but liked his family connections. He was a deeply clubbable man, but had very few close friends. I mean, a sort of pure Oxbridge college person was the model which informed so much of what went on in Australia. And I really think we're needing to think very hard now, as we sort of pull back from that model, about what we really want us to be like. And I'm not sure that our current, I mean, I take very much the point that the universities have got to stop playing games against each other and start thinking more rationally. One would hope that someone in government could start to get that off the ground. And actually, I don't have any faith in any changes to TEXA. Whatever they do, they'll turn it into a box-ticking exercise, whatever the principles are, and many, they'll be worse than they ever. So I give you this weighty text. Look, there's so much in it, which is exactly what we're talking about, the tech training versus the other. But it isn't a light read. So perhaps someone can help you with it. But it's a good piece of history.